On today's show, what should the Houston Rockets be willing to spend to keep Fred VanVleet and Steven Adams on new contracts this offseason, plus what the most recent reporting says about Houston's likelihood in pursuing Kevin Durant. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. On today's show, we got a smorgasbord of topics to hit on. A little bit later on, we'll talk about the Knicks' reported interest in Ime Udoka, and the Dunkstronaut jerseys being back, which is fun, as well as the recent reporting from Shams Charania about Houston's interest in Kevin Durant, what that reporting tells us about the kind of Kevin Durant sweepstakes. But where we're going to start is with kind of two of the biggest decisions that the Houston Rockets have to make this offseason. That's what to do with both Fred VanVleet and Steven Adams. Steven Adams, an unrestricted free agent this offseason, and then Fred VanVleet, who has a team option that could be exercised, but in all likelihood will not be exercised for close to $45 million. And therefore, what should the Houston Rockets be comfortable paying both Fred VanVleet and Steven Adams this offseason in order to retain their services? So I want to start by first taking a look at Fred VanVleet, because the issue that the Rockets are kind of faced with here with Fred VanVleet, and even though it feels like a foregone conclusion that the Rockets are, like more than likely to decline Fred VanVleet's team option and then to renegotiate a contract at a lesser, at a lower average annual value, because realistically, right, when Fred signed his contract, when he came to Houston, Fred is not a $40 million player. He's not. The Rockets paid the loser tax, if you will, in order to acquire Fred's services. And so they paid through the nose to get him, and that was kind of understood. And I think there's always been like a little bit of an under the table kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like, okay, I was overpaid for 2 years, and that third year, the team option, it looked good for my agent, it looked good for me, but understandably, you're never going to actually pick up that option. It feels like and looks like the Rockets should, right, decline that option and move on to a new deal. I won't completely rule it out as a possibility, though, especially given the fact that both sides agreed to push back the trigger date until the end of June. And that kind of, lends itself to the idea that maybe, just maybe, the Rockets might be working on some kind of a trade behind the scenes, or if not a trade behind the scenes for this offseason, maybe they're thinking that something could be had, at this upcoming trade deadline, or maybe they'd just rather, get Fred for one more year as opposed to being locked into, Fred's services for the next 3-4 years on a brand new deal, especially if you really believe in the future of Reed Sheppard with this Houston Rockets team. Then it'd be a lot harder to envision, okay, well, if you lock down Fred for 3 or 4 more seasons, then what do you do if Reed Sheppard's ready to be the starting point guard a year from now, right? Not this season, but like next season, right? Year 3, Reed Sheppard. That may be a little ambitious, but you get what I'm saying, right? It's just that, there's a lot of factors to consider here, including Fred's age, right? He's 31 years old, and he's an undersized point guard at 31 years old, coming off one of his worst shooting seasons of his career. Fred provides a lot to this Rockets team, but you also have to grapple with the reality of the situation that he's definitely not a $40 million player. And so that begs the question, how much is Fred worth in order to keep his services here in Houston? Again, Rockets have all the control here. They could just pick up his option and have one more year of Fred VanVleet, and then they could just revisit the discussion next offseason, and he wouldn't, he'd be an unrestricted free agent at that point. They'd have to compete with whatever else is out there on the market. But realistically, it's not like the Rockets have to be able to pay anybody else this offseason, and they could just let the $45 million fall off the books next offseason, and or again using it as a trade chip either this summer or ahead of next NBA trade deadline next season. So there are some benefits there to maybe just picking up the option and calling it a day. That being said, looking at what the likely outcome here is with all the reporting and the commentary from Ime Udoka and Rafael Stone and Fred himself, right? It feels like there's probably a bit of a long-term marriage at play here between Fred VanVleet and the Houston Rockets. Now, originally, I believe it was Keith Smith who suggested that the Rockets could retain Fred on something like a 3-year, $60 million contract. So he's making about $20 million a year, which feels a lot more in line with what Fred's actual value is as a player. That might be kind of lowballing it though. And in Keith Smith's original suggestion, he said, and make, 45 of that 60 million guaranteed, which is essentially what he has guaranteed right now. Because if the Rockets pick up the team option for next season, then he's guaranteed $44.8 million. So he would still get the same amount of guaranteed money, just spaced out over more years. Now, maybe that's something that he wouldn't be open to. Maybe, at that point, if the Rockets decline the option, he'd be like, well, I'm not signing that new contract. Sam Vecini was on his show the other day, the Game Theory Pod, and suggested something like a 3-year, $90 to $100 million contract that would be declining in value each subsequent year. I think that's maybe a little bit steeper than where the Rockets would probably like to be to get Fred VanVleet secured long-term. And I come away thinking maybe it's something more in the middle between those two suggestions, right? You want to keep Fred VanVleet. He's the only guy on the team that provides what he provides, right? Steady ball handling, can initiate the offense, can get guys where they need to be, can settle the troops. Jalen doesn't do that as a ball handler. Amin doesn't do that yet as a ball handler. Reed Shepherd maybe projects to do that down the line, but can't do it quite just yet. So unfortunately, Fred's the only guy with his skill set on this Rockets team currently. I feel like if you could get Fred for somewhere in the $75 million range, like 3 years, $75 million, then you're talking about approximately $25 million a year, give or take. Maybe you go 75, 80-ish, right? But approximately about $25 million a year. That feels like to me the max that Fred is ultimately worth at this stage in his career for what he provides. Anything north of 30 feels like a distinct overpay for Fred VanVleet. And then when you start factoring in, like, you look at the actual state of the Rockets backcourt, and if they did ink Fred to a 3-year, $90 million contract, you're paying a backcourt of Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green $63 million per year. That doesn't feel like a winning strategy, at least based on what we've seen from a production standpoint from both of those guys to this point, both regular season and playoffs combined. And so I think the Rockets are going to have to try and play hardball here with Fred. And even though they really appreciate everything that he's brought to this team, even though he's been an integral part of this team's success for the past 2 years, there are some shortcomings to his game. He showed some signs of maybe some regression this past season. And hopefully that's something that Rafael Stone and the Rockets front office can use as kind of a, some leverage as far as these contract negotiations ultimately go. But 3 years, $75 million seems like kind of the sweet spot for me in my mind for a Fred VanVleet contract if he were to stay in Houston. But I definitely want your thoughts. What kind of a new contract would you like to see Fred VanVleet get from the Houston Rockets? Or would you rather just see him, pick up the team option and play it out one more year, and then the Rockets aren't locked into Fred VanVleet long-term, and then maybe they're able to hand the reins over to Reed Shepherd down the line, or maybe Amin Thompson's ready to run point full-time, gives them a little bit more long-term flexibility rather than them locking themselves into Fred VanVleet for multiple years. Want your thoughts on that in the YouTube comments. Coming up, we'll talk about Steven Adams and his contract and why there's a bit of a concern that the Rockets might actually not be able to retain Steven Adams this offseason. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Wayfair. Look, there's nothing like stepping into your own outdoor space and feeling like you've escaped to a personal oasis. If you're wanting to update your patio this season, Wayfair has made it so easy to turn it into a space that feels like yours, comfortable, stylish, and ready for summertime. Wayfair has everything you need to level up your outdoor space: conversation sets, outdoor bars, fire pits, hot tubs, gazebos, and yes, even the perfect string lights to set the vibe. It's like giving your backyard that resort feel without the resort price tag. Look, I just recently picked up a couple extra lounge chairs for our backdoor patio area. My girlfriend and I, we love hosting friends, inviting people over for drinks or just to hang out. And it's awesome. We love spending time on the backdoor patio, and it's perfect. And Wayfair helped us create, an outdoor environment that felt like our little slice of heaven. So don't wait. Make your outdoor space your dream oasis today with Wayfair and enjoy it all summer long. Their delivery is fast, free, and totally hassle-free, even with larger items. There's no problems with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop a huge outdoor selection. That's wayfair.com, Wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, let's talk a little bit about Steven Adams and the potential predicament that the Rockets may be in with their backup center moving forward. Now, look, obviously Steven Adams has become an immediate fan favorite here in Houston. Watching him and his kind of career renaissance this past season was incredible. He is a delight both on and off the court. He's a very important locker room presence for this young Rockets team, and his impact on the court was undeniable, with Ime Udoka and company electing to start rolling out the double big lineups late in the season and kind of using it as a crutch to, I won't say limp to the finish line, but finish off the season strong, and then, utilizing it quite a bit against the Golden State Warriors, because that was kind of their one ace up their sleeve. Their counter, if you will, was to go big, to try and, just play bully ball and crash the glass and run that zone defense, that very bizarre zone that, worked really, really well, for almost a full 7 games against the Warriors. But as much as Rockets fans would love to see Steven Adams back in a Rockets jersey, the issue starts to kind of become how much is too much to pay for Steven Adams? How much is too much to pay for a backup center? And that's the hard part that the Houston Rockets are going to have to juggle, because this upcoming season, the non-taxpayer MLE, which, there will be a number of teams that have access to the NT MLE that could conceivably be interested in going after a guy like Steven Adams, right? Who is very much capable of still being a starting quality center in today's NBA. And then there are teams that are, completely like they're in cap hell and they've got like zero space. But at the end of the day, you can move players around. You could jettison a player or two. And there are for example, like teams like the Lakers, right, who are in desperate need for a big man. Now, maybe it's not Steven Adams because he's not where's my button? I have my button here. Oh my God. My soundboard one.
Lob threat.
Because Adams isn't a lob threat, which is ideally what you'd like to pair with Luka and LeBron. The Lakers still need a starting caliber big man. They desperately need one. And LA could conceivably, offload a player or two or move some stuff around if they needed to, in order to unlock at least the non-taxpayer MLE to be able to pursue a name like Steven Adams to bolster their starting unit, if that's the direction that they ultimately wanted to go. Or maybe a team like the Grizzlies, who, this past season kind of struggled a little bit at times with Zach Edey as their starting big. And maybe they would like to get a reunion with Steven Adams, and maybe he'd like to go back to Memphis. There's no shortage of different teams that could possibly pursue Steven Adams here. Something that I heard that, I'm taking with a little bit of a grain of salt, but it's worth noting here, is that the Rockets are maybe internally a little worried of being priced out of keeping Steven Adams. Now, logistically, the Rockets can pay Steven Adams whatever they want, right? They have his bird rights. They can go up to whatever amount they want to retain his services. They can outbid pretty much any other team that rolls along, unless like a team like Brooklyn Nets with cap space rolls along and gives them like $25 million a year, then that's not happening. But realistically, the teams that are going to try to pry Steven Adams from the Rockets are going to do so with the non-taxpayer MLE, which clocks in at about $14.1 million. So if you're the Rockets, in order to retain Steven's services, you're looking at probably something like $15 million a year minimum to keep him here in Houston. That's also not factoring in, is Steven Adams content with being a backup behind Alperen and Sengun, right? Is he content with only getting 15 to 20 minutes a night, maybe 25 a night if the Rockets continue to deploy the double big lineup sporadically throughout the season? Like, who knows, right? And that's the hard part when you're kind of gauging, what's going to happen in free agency and where certain players are going to go. It's really hard to kind of weigh some of these other decisions, like how much do they prioritize being in a winning environment? How much do they prioritize making as much money as possible? How much do they prioritize being a starter versus coming off the bench? And these are all factors to ultimately consider. But if you're the Rockets, you're looking at probably absolute minimum, like to keep Steve-O in a Rockets jersey, like 3 years, probably $45 million at the bare minimum. And that's assuming you're not trying to outbid another team that might kind of, be more competitive in the sense of some of those other ancillary benefits. If another team is offering him, 3 years, $14.1 million of non-taxpayer MLE, or even up to 4 years doing that, then that might be a harder offer to combat if you're the Rockets, right? If some team comes along and offers Steve-O the max non-taxpayer MLE, so 14.1 a year over the next 4 years, are you willing to then sign Steven Adams to a 4-year, $60+ million deal in order to beat out that offer? And that's where you start to get into some of that gray area of like, it feels like, yes, the Rockets would like to keep Steve-O. It feels like maybe he'd like to still be here in Houston. But from what I heard, right, there's a little bit of a concern that they might get priced out of Steven Adams, so much so that the Rockets are actually really heavily considering and looking at both Derek Queen and Kaman Maluach with that number 10 pick if either one of them slides down to number 10. So that's something that came across my radar and absolutely something worth paying attention to here, because if the Rockets on draft night select a center with that number 10 overall pick, you can almost all but guarantee Steven Adams is no longer going to be in a Houston Rockets jersey. Once, the free agency moratorium opens up and offers start coming out and stuff. And that's the difficulty here, right? Is, the Rockets have Alperen Sengun locked up for the next 5 seasons or 4 seasons plus a player option. And then, Alp's making $33 million a year. How much are you really comfortable paying a backup center? Right? That's the hard part, is when you're juggling all these different salaries and figuring out who you're going to pay, who you're not going to pay, when you have to factor in that, Jabari and Tari are both up for their rookie scale extensions this offseason. And then, that next offseason, you're going to probably have to give, more than likely, you're going to have to give Ime Thompson a rookie scale max extension, 1 year from now. That's these numbers start to add up over time. And so do you really want to be on the hook for, $15 million a year plus to Steven Adams, when conceivably, if there is a big man in the draft that you feel pretty good about that can give you 10 to 12 minutes a night of, backup 5 minutes, and if you're planning to keep Jabari Smith Jr. long-term and you can utilize him as a backup 5 as well, I hate talking about it like this because I would love to see Steven Adams retire a Houston Rocket. Honestly, he is such a gem of a human being, and both his on and off court impact is immeasurable, but it is something that's worth considering. And so I leave you with that, right? I think I would do it. If you could get Steven Adams for 3 years, $45 million, I think that's a no-brainer. If the price has to go up, if the price tag increases at any point, if it goes up to 17.5 or starts creeping up to 20 million, if you have to outbid another team like the Lakers or some other team out there that wants to give him the non-tax MLE, then I think that's where you might have to just cut your losses and be like, you know what, Steve-O, it was a great season. We wish you the best, but that's too much to pay for a backup big man. So realistically, how much would you be willing to pay Steven Adams if you were Rafael Stone, if you were the Houston Rockets front office? What kind of a contract would you like to see the Houston Rockets try to strike with him? Give me your options. Give me your pitches in the YouTube comments. Coming up, Houston was listed first in the list of destinations for Kevin Durant as possible trade partners with the Phoenix Suns. What that means coming up here in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Look, there's nothing like the NBA playoffs, and this NBA Finals has been awesome through 2 games so far. The intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere you must experience live. If you want in, Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer. Look, for me, I've used Game Time throughout this season to buy Rockets tickets for the games that I wanted to go to as a fan instead of being there as a media member. And it's awesome, right? Like being there and experiencing the crowd, seeing the hype, being there for the in-season tournament game against the Warriors, being there for all of the home games against the Warriors in this most recent Rockets playoff run. It was absolutely fantastic. Game Time helps you get in the door and experience live sports the way that they were meant to be experienced. So check out Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, the latest in the Kevin Durant trade saga, some reporting from Shams Charania of ESPN. The Phoenix Suns and Kevin Durant's business partner, boardroom CEO Rich Kleiman, have met multiple times over the past week and are sifting through trade scenarios. Sources told ESPN the two sides are expected to work together on potential destinations. Teams that have expressed interest in Durant, sources said, mainly feature the Houston Rockets, San Antonio Spurs, Miami Heat, Minnesota Timberwolves, and the New York Knicks. Several wildcard suitors have made inquiries on Durant in the past 7 to 10 days as well, sources said. So this is the latest in the KD trade saga. And look, I know there's a subsection of Rockets fans that are sick about hearing about KD, but as long as KD is news, we got to talk about it on the show. So these 5 teams have remained the consistent 5 teams at the top of the KD sweepstakes. Now, I will say that of these 5 teams, I think it's very clear that the Rockets and Spurs have the best possible offers to make for Kevin Durant, although the Knicks have a sneaky good option to potentially pursue KD, and we'll talk about that more in just a second. But I think it's always worth noting, right, this time of year, it's very important to pay attention to where these leaks are coming from, where these sources are being provided. And when you look at the language and the terminology on this one, Kevin Durant's business partner, boardroom CEO Rich Kleiman, like that language is very clearly coming out of Kevin Durant's camp. That's coming out of his circle. That's coming straight from the horse's mouth, right? So this isn't a team leaking this. Isn't the Suns leaking this? This is Kevin Durant basically saying, these are the teams that I would like to go to. These are the teams that I am most interested in joining in order to, still compete at the highest of levels, yada, 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 whatever. Which honestly, not a bad short list of teams. Like you go back to, I'm trying to think of like the Damian Lillard saga with the Portland Trailblazers, right? And how it was all eyes on Miami, and Portland and Miami were in this like stalemate where just Dame only wanted Miami, and Miami refused to put their best offer on the table. So Portland was like, well, we're not budging. And then after like months of this like Mexican standoff, they finally, like Dame finally opened it up, was like, okay, maybe how about Milwaukee too? And then they were able to strike a deal and figure things out, and they were able to send Dame to Milwaukee, and it worked out. Worked out, loosely worked out. I'm saying worked out like the trade happened. I'm not saying that it was successful, because Dame and Giannis haven't had much success in their time together in Milwaukee, but I digress. The point here being that I think it's very clear that you can look at this reporting and understand that this is very clearly the short list of teams that KD specifically has interest in playing for. And we know that in the past, the Rockets have been very intrigued by the thought of going after Kevin Durant. We know that internally there are a lot of connections that KD has to this Houston Rockets organization. So then the idea starts to become, okay, well, this is KD's shortlist. And if he's cool with any of these 5 teams, then you start having to look at it from a Phoenix Suns perspective and getting into, okay, well, what do the Suns want out of a Kevin Durant trade? And this is where I think there's a very interesting wrinkle that's being thrown in here with the Knicks being reported as a possible suitor. I'm not saying this is the smart or right decision for the Phoenix Suns, but if the Suns are hell-bent on staying competitive, like they don't want to trade Devin Booker, they're stuck with Beal, so like you got to do whatever you can with Beal. If they are hell-bent on retooling, quote-unquote, around Devin Booker and trying to remain competitive, then their best possible avenue for achieving that isn't the Rockets' possible trade package for KD, which is frankly chump change because that's all the Rockets are willing to give up to get Kevin Durant. They're not going to give them multiple young prospects. They're not going to give them multiple of their own picks back. And even if they do, the Suns don't want to bottom out. So getting their own picks back doesn't matter if you're not willing to tank. Quite possibly the best return for KD at this point is probably Karl-Anthony Towns from the Knicks, right? And Towns is already a clunky fit in New York. Like the Knicks made that trade because it would help them match up better with Boston, which it did ultimately. But, you know, especially with New York looking for a new head coach, more on that in a second, with the Rockets basically telling them no about Ime Udoka. But I very much see a reality where New York and Phoenix could basically do a Cat for KD swap. And first off, Cat and Devin Booker are like longtime close friends, right? They play like Call of Duty together and they hang out outside of the game all the time. And that'd be like a cool, like fun storyline. And that would probably be the best case scenario for Phoenix. If your goal is simply to win with Devin Booker and you want to give him the contract extension, you don't want to trade him, you're not looking to tear things down, then flipping KD into Karl-Anthony Towns and giving Booker, Cat as a running mate, as a big man partner, and then putting the right pieces around those two guys, you'd still have a lot of hurdles to get over because you still have a very flawed roster outside of those two guys, and you still have to figure out the Beal situation, and that's going to be a mess until his contract expires, or if you're able to trade him. Well, no trade clause, never mind, that's not happening. Point is, feels like the Rockets could potentially be out of the running for the KD sweepstakes simply just because I don't think the Rockets are willing to put up a better offer than Karl-Anthony Towns. Not an offer that matches with what the Phoenix Suns at least have said publicly their goal is regarding the future of their franchise. Now, if Phoenix looked like they were willing and ready to tear things down and tank for a couple of years, whatever, then yeah, the Rockets would be right at the front of the line looking for either Devin Booker or Kevin Durant in a return package, because then you get to cash in on the Phoenix picks and all this other stuff. So I think that it's very important to kind of, again, consider where these sources are coming from, and then looking at those 5 teams, that short list of teams. Maybe the Spurs be able to put together a really enticing package that'd be too hard to pass up on, but I can't see the Spurs willing to put up like the number 2 pick or Steph Castle or anything like that for Kevin Durant. The Spurs package for KD would probably be very similar to the Rockets, where they're willing to put in like a little bit of draft capital and like some salary filler here and there, but everybody knows that KD wants out. So the Rockets, the Spurs, the Heat, they're not going to bid against themselves, right? And overpay for Kevin Durant at this point. Again, it kind of feels like the Knicks have the best offer there for KD. So just wanted to highlight that and that most recent bit of reporting from Shams. Now, I will say very quickly, as we're wrapping up the show, a couple other points to hit on. The Rockets did formally deny the Knicks' request to interview Ime Udoka, because the Knicks are just running around trying to poach existing head coaches. Like they wanted to go first. It was Jason Kidd and Ime Udoka with the Mavericks and Rockets. Then it was Chris Finch with the Wolves. And it's like, I don't know if the Knicks realize that they're allowed to go hire a head coach that's not currently employed by another organization. But apparently, right, Stephen A. Smith, was on air when he was like, and I mean, I said it the other day too. I got a text about it. So like, it's funny because they're basically just like, it's not happening. And so, yeah, like I just think it's funny that the Knicks are like doing this whole song and dance when I don't know who they're going to wind up with. Probably Michael Malone, honestly, all things considered. That feels like a perfect match for New York, but I digress. And then final thing here, just a little bit of cool, fun news. The Rockets are bringing back the Dunkstronaut jerseys next season. A lot of fans were really sad to see those jerseys go away this past year. I was really disappointed to see them not bring them back. Honestly, I loved the Dunkstronaut so much. I feel like it should honestly become the team's primary logo if they could get away with it. I don't know what bureaucratic red tape the Rockets would have to jump through to make the Dunkstronaut their primary logo. And could you imagine the Dunkstronaut in like different colorways? Like, could you imagine the Dunkstronaut? I know it looks really good in like the kind of the red, white, blue colorway that it's got going on right now, but could you imagine the Dunkstronaut in like a red and black colorway or like the ketchup and mustard colorway? Like, oh my God, it would be so cool. And it's a little bit better than like the really tired, like our logo that's been around for a while now. Like we've heard for years now, it feels like the Rockets need a refresh as far as their logo, their team identity. And especially with this being like kind of this new iteration of the team, it almost feels like a perfect time for a Rockets rebrand. And so, well, I don't think it'll happen as soon as this offseason or next year or whatever, but maybe with the success, if they bring the Dunkstronauts back and they're really, they really like them again next year, then maybe that's enough of a push in the right direction for them to consider, even if it's not fully just the Dunkstronaut, but a full kind of logo rebrand and all that good stuff. And look, I think I speak for a lot of Rockets fans, maybe all Rockets fans, when I say, just please bring back the ketchup and mustard jerseys. They're so nice. Like I've got them hanging in the background. They look so clean. They're so nice. They're so unique. I don't think any other team does a red and yellow like colorway for their jerseys. Maybe I'm mistaken. But it would give the Rockets a unique look compared to all 29 other teams in the association. So with that, give me your thoughts on the Dunkstronaut making its triumphant return next season. The Rockets telling the Knicks, LOL, no. The KD stuff, the contract stuff for Fred and Steve-O. Give me all your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform you're choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.